Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod with Matt McQuinn. Matt is co-founder at Coldlytics, that is. He does outbound marketing, training, outbound sales, just like one of my companies. So we're going to have a fun conversation talking about new ways to outreach to folks, original ways, hopefully, that can get you in that mailbox and get you in that calendar. This podcast is brought to you by podpar.com. If you want to start your own pod, scale it the unconventional way, you can go to podpar.com. Matt, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and Coldlytics.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I come from a digital agency background where I was generating leads for business brokers and M&A advisors and running the entire operations process for that business. And in my career to date, I've managed about 2 to 3 million cold emails in total. And I always tell people 90% of those cold emails taught me about the 2% that made people millions of dollars. And the 90% really were educational and learning trial by error, trial by fire. So it's been an interesting journey because when I first started learning this, it was quite easy to get results with cold email. And now the game has changed drastically over the last 4 years. Things have changed very, very quickly to make it very difficult for people that aren't set up properly to send cold emails, that don't know how to communicate a sales message well and effectively to the right people. You know, there's more spam than there's ever been. So email providers really are cracking down on everything they can to make it difficult for people to succeed with cold email if you don't know what you're doing. So it's really important to kind of learn from, podcasts like this and people who are actively doing cold email to hear what's working for them, what strategies they've done, what methods they've employed to get leads. And I'm happy to kind of go down that path and elaborate on any of that.
Let's start with targeting. How do you target the right folks the right way? I use a bunch of tools for my database: Apollo, ContactOut, Ample Market, Ocean.io, and
Right.
sometimes custom built lists with Clay, which is probably the best list builder out there. How should we build these lists the easiest way possible? And what tools do you recommend for that?
Great question. So obviously I'm biased as an email data provider. But I'll explain kind of some of the fundamentals and then how we provide data. So this will kind of give you some good insight. So there's three main ways to get data. The first one that everybody knows about is buying a database. And databases, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with because I've made money by buying databases. But for the most part, what I've found by emailing people who came out of a database is that the contacts have been burned by every single one of my competitors who bought that database before I did. They've heard all the same pitches. They've heard all the same offers. It's very difficult to get through to people that everybody is pitching every day of the week because we all bought the same 15 plumbers in one city from Apollo, for example. And not to bash on Apollo. Apollo is if you're getting started, probably the best place to start because it's high volume for a very low cost. It's a good place to learn if you're getting started. But as far as lead quality goes and volume of quality leads, I don't find databases to be reliable and not scalable in the big picture. So outside of the issues you get with databases around kind of the lists being burned, and in some cases, it's not even feasible for startups because some of the big players even ask for 1 to 2 year commitments. When you're a startup, you don't even know if you're going to be around in 6 months. So it's hard to commit to multi-year contracts when you're doing outbound. Most people are doing outbound initially because it's very low cost and it's easy to get started with. You don't have money for paid ads, etc. So these things all come into play with databases, which make it a struggle. The second is scraping tools. You mentioned Clay, a fantastic platform. There's many great scraping tools out there. The problem that I have with scraping tools in general is that most people aren't tech experts. They're not experts in scraping. They're not experts in data. So what happens is it's like being a backyard mechanic. You may understand how to change the oil, but when it comes to doing brakes or maybe replacing your front struts or something a little bit more complicated than just doing an oil change, you kind of get into this area where you debatably should or shouldn't be doing that type of work. And what happens is it tends to take you a lot longer than it would take a professional. You make a lot more mistakes. You buy the wrong tools. And you eventually get the job done and it's okay in the end, but it's usually not awesome. Now, if you get really good at it, you practice for a long time, you can get good at scraping lists and refining the data. But the problem is with scrape data in general is that it's time consuming and it requires a fair bit of manual intervention and scrubbing after the fact, just to make the list useful. And usually the first scrape that you get, Clay is all about this. You'll have to kind of enrich it with other sources of data as well. Usually the first scrape that you pull is not going to be the final list that you end up with, in my experience. Now, you look frozen on my screen. So before I keep going, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Um, so scraping is its own challenge, but it's certainly a good way to collect mass amounts of data. If you have the time and interest in going through it, making the data quality, and you understand the different data processes, it's the viable way to get lists. But ultimately, it's usually not a good use of somebody's time who's an expert in sales and should be closing 6, 5, 6, 7-figure deals. Cleaning up lists and scraping data is usually not that person's, strong suit, and shouldn't be where they spend their time and energy. So it's one of those things where as you get out of that initial startup phase in a business and you're wearing all the hats, you really have to ask yourself, should I be doing this, or should there be somebody else involved in my data sourcing? Because ultimately it's a lower value task in the big picture. So again, another viable option, but has its challenges. And then the third is hiring researchers. And I have hired dozens, if not hundreds at this point, of researchers from around the world to try and find people who understood Western business and could source leads consistently at scale. And what I found was the challenge with these researchers generally is that they just do not understand the Western business world. And so they don't understand the industries and the nuances that go into building lists for marketing in North America or the UK, et cetera, where much of this outreach is taking place. So you end up with this big knowledge gap between, hey, trying to communicate, this is what I need for leads, and them actually delivering something totally different. And again, you go back into the same thing you did with scraping. It's like, hey, I might have found leads I wouldn't have found scraping myself, but I have to remove half this list and I haven't even validated my emails yet. So working with freelancers is usually very time consuming and cost inhibitive when you're buying bad data over and over again, and you have to spend your own time cleaning up and validating that data on top of the process. So those are the three main ways I have bought data prior to this. And I was sourcing on average in my past life about 200,000 contacts a month. So I've seen everything that can go wrong. I've tried to bring people in-house to do some of these things, and I've tried pretty much everything everybody can do. When I met my co-founder, this was about 2.5 years ago, he said, hey, I've got a process that's going to deliver better quality data than I think anybody else has. And it's fresh researched. I said, yeah, I work with researchers. Tell me what's different about this. He said, well, what I'm doing is I'm giving people a platform that's self-serve. They come in, they don't talk to a researcher. They just come in and say, hey, here's the different criteria that I'm looking for. And they submit it. And we have built in-house scrapers that are really good at identifying Western businesses, and we understand the interpretation of that request. So we actually go out and manage the scraping process to get the business contact information. But that's only the first step. You then have to enrich that with the actual contact finding component. And so at that stage, we pass that over to the team of human researchers who go out and enrich the business data with contact information. So they find out who the owner is, what title they go by, and what their actual direct email address is. So you're combining the best of sourcing the right type of company and pairing it with the right type of lead information on the other side. And then all of that gets validated through Zero Bounce's real-time API to confirm that all emails are deliverable and good email addresses. So that's how we run our process. It's a combination of many of the first, of the last two things we discussed about data sourcing between scraping and human research, and combines the best of it by having the whole process being ran and overseen by somebody who is in North America or the UK, who understands the Western business economy and understands what people are looking for at the forefront of that list request. So the list quality is significantly better as a result of doing that. So that's something I'm really passionate about because, like I said, I bought a lot of data that hasn't worked, and I've experienced a lot of the things that can go wrong with data. And if you're trying to sell meat to a vegan, then you may as well just give up and go get another job, because it's not going to work for you. And that's what happens when you buy data that you don't know if it's qualified, if you've scrubbed it, if you've validated, you know what I mean? You're wasting your time, and you're burning usually your email domains, etc. So it's not something you want to mess around with, in my opinion, for longer than you have to. If you've got no cash, I understand in the beginning, you got to do what you have to do to get low cost lead data. But you will very quickly find that as your time becomes worth 20, 50, 100, $500 an hour, spending an hour or two scraping data and then passing it off to an enrichment process costs you well over $1,000 for a list of 500 leads. And that just doesn't make any sense if you value your time. So that's where Coldlytics comes into play. That's why we built this business, is to say, hey, research-based data ran by a team of people that understand the type of leads you're looking for and guarantee the quality of it and the deliverability of that list in a way that gives it an edge on top of databases, because we're finding leads that aren't necessarily in databases, because everything is researched from scratch.
Love it. It's sort of like a SaaS and agency hybrids. I love the
Right.
UX part of it. It's very easy to use and smooth sailing type of experience. So good job on that. How much
Appreciate it.
clients do you have, and who do you target normally?
Yeah, so we've worked with over 800 clients to date in the past 2.5 years. I'm going to say about 700 of those have been agencies. Like 80 to 90% of our business has come from marketing agencies. And a big part of that, again, is because that's my career experience. When we planned product development, I said, hey, let's see if we can add this or that feature. And so we have data points for agencies that nobody else in the industry has. For example, we can build lists based on people who are set up to advertise on Google or Facebook. So people have been advertising already. We can detect that information and build lists based on that. Some people do offer that. We take it another step further. We can look for websites built on certain platforms, for example, so a Shopify store or a WordPress site. Again, things you can do with platforms like Clay. Then we take it another step further. We will check the page speed of those websites. So then you can say, hey, I'm looking for plumbers in Idaho who have websites that load in more than 6 seconds. That's a poor website. And so, if you sell SEO services, that's going to be a great lead for you to reach out to, because you can offer to give them 2 or 3 free bits of information that'll take their business up a notch in the rankings. We also allow people to filter lists based on the position they show up in Google. So you can tell us to, hey, source this list, look for plumbers in Idaho, but don't give me anybody from the first 5 or 6 listings on the Google results. We want everybody who came in position 7 and lower and also has a slow website, for example. So these are advantages to marketing agencies in particular that you just don't see at any other platform, because we built it for people to sell agency services, in addition to all the basic stuff of like, hey, when was this company founded? How many employees do they have? What's their revenue? All of that stuff everybody offers, and so do we. But we've really found some great value for agencies that I get really excited to talk about, because it's something nobody else is doing.
The SEO niche, or the agency niche, I mean, the page load time is cool, especially included in a cold email. But I find that these niches are so oversaturated. And even if you mention the speed time, these folks, they've worked with so many idiots in the past that they won't believe you. What do you have to say on the copywriting side of things and the offer side of things?
Mhm. So every man and his dog that's been involved in marketing has received, and probably received this week, somebody telling them, hey, I've got 10,000 qualified leads for $100. Just buy this list. Um, I get those emails, and I run a data company. So everybody's getting pitched with bad data. So for me to launch this business, I knew I was up against a big challenge to go out into cold email and be yet another person to email everybody who's getting these emails and say, hey, I'm a new lead provider who's been around for 10 minutes. You should try my leads. Um, so there's this value equation that comes into place. So you've got 2 major things that you need to put a measure on, and you have to estimate these in the beginning. How much trust does this prospect that you're reaching out to have with you? And usually in the beginning, that's very, very low, if none at all. And that's what it is in most cases when you're doing cold email. Most of them don't have any connection to you. Maybe if you're part of the same industry association and you bought that list, then you've got a little bit of trust because you're both in the same group or association. But most lists that you start with, you have no rapport, no trust. And the other side of this equation is the value you bring in the email. And people in the marketing and sales world hear value and they think of pitching, basically, because they know the thing they sell is valuable. So they basically think their pitch is bringing value. And it's an ignorant way to do outreach because it doesn't work. Everybody sends a cold pitch and asks them to book a 15-minute meeting so they can help them make $1 million this year. It's what everybody's doing. So the problem is you have to figure out a way to be valuable to these people who have no trust with you very quickly because it's a cold email. They're not going to spend a lot of time reading it. So what I do in my cold emails is I come out and I say, and so let me take this back to the agency context for a second first. Many of the agencies that we work with say what they're doing is they will email them and say, hey, noticed X, Y, or Z problem about your marketing. I would be happy to give you 3 things that we've done for similar businesses that really changed their inbound lead flow as a result. And, we're experts in this. Happy to just give you the information. And if you're interested in implementation, we sell it as a service. But nonetheless, it would be very valuable for you to know these 3 things that you could easily be doing. Okay, great. That's a great intro to somebody who doesn't know you because you're immediately saying, hey, I see 3 problems and 3 areas of opportunity, and I'm happy to tell you what those are for free. Just reply with a simple yes. So for me in the software space, it's a little bit different. What I do for people, and I don't do this anywhere else on the internet. The only place I give away free data is in a cold email. And the reason for that is these people don't know me from a hole in the ground and everybody wants their money. So I tell them, hey, I know this is a cold email. I don't necessarily say that, but I approach it that way. It's very short. And I say, hey, I can provide you with people who need SEO based on certain metrics that we track. And I can give you 50 of those leads on me. If you want to buy more after, great, but at least you can open the relationship with me at no risk to you and accept these 50 leads. Do you want to set up a call to do that? And people say yes. And I get on demos all the time for that because they understand, hey, there's next to no risk for me. If it works, I'll become a customer. If not, hey, I didn't lose anything in the process, really. So it's all about that value to trust equation. And the more they trust you, the more they know you, the less value you have to demonstrate up front. And they'll just trust the economics of the business to say, hey, we know 3 other people that work with this business. If we need data, we'll just go to that business, no problem. Or if we need marketing services, I know 3 other plumbers who use him. I'm going to use him because they trust the economics of the business versus that cold first intro. You really have to bring up the value and say, here's so much value that you should pay a little bit of attention to me. And if you're interested in what you hear after this, then we can have a better conversation that might lead to a sale. That's how I approach cold email marketing. And I think, you have to, in this environment, really monitor that value equation if you're going to get any traction at all.
Then how do you know if you have a product market fit? How do you test at scale, and what data do you look at to see if your offer works?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think every business kind of starts with a hunch of people understand a pain point in something and then they try to solve it. Like that's generally how people get to business ideas, or they're just copying somebody else's. They saw an agency course and they bought the agency course. Now they're trying to start an agency. So that's kind of the 2 ways I think most people start a business is they either buy into a model that somebody else has proven works, or they come up with their own solution to a problem and try to sell that. Initially, if you're not buying into a franchise or a program that teaches you a business process, you are essentially testing a wild ass guess. And so what we did when we started the business was we grabbed batches of 1,000 leads in several different industries, and we cold emailed 1,000 messages to, I'm going to say, upwards of 10 to 15 different industries to see, hey, where did we get traction with any of these? Did any of them turn into customers? Did any of them even turn into a sales conversation? Because initially, when you start a new business and you start cold email, your messaging is really poor and the quality is really poor. So you're not expecting much conversion, but you can at least get a read on, hey, is there interest from this industry? So that's my first kind of litmus test is I take a batch, it could be 100, could be 1,000, and I'll test a group and say, hey, did I get any response? If yes, I investigate that a little bit further. And we got our first 30 customers in this business by doing cold email following that process. We offered a large amount of value up front into an industry that showed a bit of interest in my first batch of cold emails, and eventually people signed up. And our pricing when we first launched the product was stupid low. We were giving out tons of leads for very low cost. We hardly made any money, but it got people into the business, started to get us testimonials and reviews. And then about, I'm going to say the first year, year and a half, we played with the pricing as we brought in new customers, gained reviews and social proof. And then we put the pricing up to where it is now. We said, okay, this is a place that we're happy to sustain operating the business at. These other levels, we don't want to run the business for making that kind of money. But at this level, we're satisfied and it's worth being in business. So we're going to stick to this level now that we have the social proof from bringing a ton of value and hardly making anything in the beginning, just to get that trust established in the marketplace and to get us a little bit of a reputation. So if you're in the beginning of this journey with starting a business, where you start is certainly not where you're going to end up. And you have to mentally prepare yourself that you're not going to sell the top package right out of the gate. And people don't trust you to pay you the same price as an established business. So you have to trade off that, hey, I'm new and I don't have any social proof, with an exchange of, well, there's such an upside to this, it's worth giving this guy my money instead of spending twice the price elsewhere.
And then what stats do you check? Open rates, reply rates, email to meeting rates, closing rates, sales cycle. Where do you, or what stat do you check to see where you're going?
Good question. So all of those are valid things that you can optimize. If you track any of those, you can optimize them and improve them. So there's value in doing all of that. I personally struggle with administrative work, and I'm not interested right now in bringing on a salesperson who's good at administrative work. So for me personally, in my business, all that I track, I don't even track open rates because it can affect the deliverability. So I just send plain text emails. I don't track open rates on those emails. What I do track is my lead rate. So how many emails did I send that turned into somebody saying I'm interested? Not even a meeting, just a level of interest. And right now for me, that's about 2%. Out of every 100 emails I send, 2 people come back and say, great, I would like to know more. And I'm happy with that to start. Obviously that could be optimized and I could do much better, but that's kind of my frame of thinking around that.
Right. Then in terms of tech stack to actually send your emails, what are you using? Are you sending from Play, Apollo SendGrid combo, instantly? What are you using?
Yeah, so my workflow looks like this. I pull my list down, and when I do my own lists, I search for. So we have a website keywords filter in Coldlytics where you can have us detect and filter for websites that mention specific text on their site. So for me, the one I'm currently running is SEO. I get a large list of agencies and I make sure they all have SEO on their website. And then I send those people a very specific email about solving SEO problems, generating leads for SEO. And that's where I get interest. So my first step is to identify, hey, what kind of unique thing can I pull from their website to add to personalization that's going to get this list to convert? Then, of course, I get my list from my own company at Coldlytics, and I export that as a CSV, and I upload it into Instantly AI. Then in Instantly, when I first started, I didn't send emails for about 4 weeks. I had to warm up fresh accounts, and it took about 4 to 5 weeks to get them to a 90+% health rating. Once they were in that zone, I started sending my cold emails. I did an interview with their business development manager, and he said, you can send about 30 emails per account. I set mine to 25. I just play it extra safe because I've burned so many accounts over time. I use a platform called privateemail.com that's managed through namecheap.com, and it's not recommended by most people. I'm just going to put that out there right now. Most people will tell you use Google or Microsoft. And the logic behind that, it took me a while to understand this, is that platforms like Instantly will try to match the email provider of the lead you're contacting with the email that you have set up. So if you have one from Google and one from Microsoft, different emails in your sending account, Instantly optimizes for that, which I think is great. But if you're just sending from one email and you're trying to decide, hey, do I do private email, which is like $2 a month, or Google for $12 a month, or Microsoft, etc., those domains are the Google and Microsoft world own most of the email space. And if an email comes from within their own ecosystem, they're more likely to deliver that to the inbox of the receiver of somebody else in their network, because they know they monitor for spam quite closely. So if it's coming from somebody we haven't flagged, then it's probably an important email that this person's sending to somebody else in our network. So your deliverability statistically is going to be higher by using an email that's from Google or Microsoft. Like I said, I run mine through private email. I don't have issues. I stay in that 90% zone. And then from there, I used to run a pipe drive CRM and track people who were interested in there. And like I said, I suck at administrative stuff. I hate tracking minute details like that. And so I've just got to a level where I have a meeting. And if the meeting went well, I set a follow-up reminder on my calendar. And inside my instantly inbox, I set a reminder to check on this conversation again later. And that's the extent of my CRM management. So they go from coming into my list to going into instantly to having a meeting. And then once we're on that meeting, we set up an account together on Coldlytics. So at that point, they're in my ecosystem in the business and they're getting my drip sequences, et cetera. I don't really have to do any extra steps like people do with Salesforce, because in the software world, my software is sending out all these emails for marketing anyway. So that's how my process looks, but every business is different. And I'm sure there's tons of room for optimization in my own processes.
Thanks for sharing that, Matt. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, for sure. If you want to reach me directly, I manage the live chat on our website, and I'm going to do that for as long as I can sustain it in the business, because I think it's important to get really, really good support. So if you want to reach out to me directly, coldlytics.com, use the live chat in the bottom left corner, or you can go to LinkedIn, and you'll find me on LinkedIn as well under Matt McQuinn. So I appreciate anybody that's taken the time to listen this far into what I had to say, and hopefully there's been some good value for you guys.